Hey guys, tonight we drift slowly through narrow stone streets still warm from the day's fading sun, toward a city that has learned to outlive almost everyone who ever threatened it. You are standing in Constantinople, April of 1453, where the air smells faintly of salt from the Bosphorus, old incense trapped in church walls, and the kind of dust that only comes from buildings that have been standing for 1,000 years. Somewhere nearby, a bell rings. Not urgently, not yet. Just enough to remind you that time still technically exists. You probably won't survive this if you're expecting a heroic last stand full of glory and clean endings. History, as usual, is messier, slower, and far more exhausting. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, feel free to drop a comment telling us where you're listening from and what time it is there. Insomnia, it turns out, is wonderfully international. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin by simply existing inside the city at twilight. No trumpets, no dramatic speeches, just the soft shuffle of sandals on worn marble, the low murmur of Greek drifting from doorways, and the distant cry of seabirds circling above the harbors. Constantinople has always been a place of thresholds, between continents, between seas, between eras. And tonight it feels particularly balanced on the edge of something unnamed. The sky over the Golden Horn deepens into layered blues and purples, reflected in water that has carried Roman triremes, Byzantine dromons, and merchant ships from places you will never see. You pass houses patched together from centuries of repairs, stone blocks scavenged from older ruins, columns turned sideways and reused, because when you've been around this long, aesthetics become negotiable. The city is smaller than its reputation suggests. That's one of the first quiet shocks. This was once the beating heart of an empire stretching from Spain to Syria. Yet now large sections inside the walls are gardens, orchards, and empty lots, where neighborhoods never recovered from earlier disasters. Plague, fire, sack, civil war. Constantinople has already practiced ending several times. A mainstream historical fact, whispered rather than announced. By 1453, the Byzantine Empire is little more than Constantinople itself, plus a few scattered territories. The idea of empire lingers mostly as memory, ritual, and paperwork. The emperor still signs documents as Basileus of the Romans, even though the Romans he rules over could fit comfortably into a modern sports stadium with seats to spare. You feel that contradiction everywhere. Grand structures loom over quiet streets. Hagia Sophia rises ahead of you, massive and patient, its dome catching the last light of day like a held breath. Built in the 6th century, it has survived earthquakes, riots, iconoclasm, and previous sieges. Some people swear the building itself hums softly at night, as if remembering old chants embedded in its stone. That might be imagination, or fatigue, or the simple fact that humans have a habit of hearing meaning when they're scared. You pause in the square listening. There's no panic yet. Shops are closing as they always do. A baker sweeps flour from his threshold. Somewhere, a dog barks, annoyed at history for being inconvenient. This is the strange calm before a famous catastrophe, the part no one puts on monuments. People still have dinner plans. Children still complain. Laundry still flaps lazily between buildings. Historians still argue whether the people of Constantinople truly believed the city could fall this time. After all, it had withstood sieges by Persians, Arabs, Rus, Bulgars, and Latins. The Theodosian walls, those colossal, layered defenses stretching for miles, had been considered nearly impregnable for centuries. There's a psychological inertia to success like that. If something has saved you 10 times, you assume it will save you an 11th, even when the world has changed around it. And the world has changed. You sense it in small details first. foreign accents in the markets, Ottoman merchants passing through, polite but observant. Rumors drifting in with travelers, of a young sultan to the east, ambitious, patient, unnervingly focused. Mehmed, they say, wants this city not just for power, but for symbolism. Constantinople isn't merely a prize, it's a punctuation mark at the end of an age. You don't meet Mehmed tonight. Not yet. For now, you're still inside the city, feeling how the evening settles like a blanket pulled too tight. Oil lamps flicker on one by one, throwing long shadows across stone pavements polished smooth by centuries of feet. You imagine all the other evenings like this, before the Fourth Crusade, before the Black Death, before civil wars that pitted emperor against emperor. Each generation thought they were living in the late chapter of history. Most were wrong. This one might not be. A quirky tidbit drifts into your thoughts, the kind of thing that sounds unimportant until it isn't. Constantinople has long-standing prophecies attached to it. One says the city will fall when a moon rises red, another that it will be taken by a ruler whose name matches the city's founder. People argue about these details endlessly, adjusting interpretations like loose garments. Prophecy, you're learning, is remarkably flexible under pressure. You walk closer to the sea walls, where the Bosphorus narrows and currents swirl unpredictably. The water here has always been both protector and threat. It brings food, trade, and connection, but also enemies. From this spot, you can almost see Asia across the strait, a reminder that Constantinople is technically European, but spiritually bilingual. East and West meet here, argue here, marry here, and occasionally try to kill each other here. Above you, the walls loom, not just one wall but several, layered like a geological formation of paranoia. Built in the 5th century, repaired countless times, they are masterpieces of late Roman military engineering. Towers punctuate them at regular intervals, their silhouettes cutting into the darkening sky. You run your hand over the stone. It's cool, pitted, scarred. This wall has been hit by everything from arrows to siege towers to early cannonballs. It has mostly shrugged. Mostly. There's a subtle anxiety you can't quite place yet. The guards are attentive, but not frantic. Supplies are being moved, but not hoarded. Priests chant evening prayers, their voices steady, practiced. This isn't a city screaming. It's a city holding its breath. That distinction matters. You overhear fragments of conversation. Some people talk about reinforcements from the West that might arrive any day now. Others scoff, pointing out that Western Europe has its own problems and its own grudges against Constantinople, especially after centuries of theological arguments and that awkward little incident in 1204 when Crusaders sacked the city instead of helping it. Family reunions after that tend to be tense. A light joke slips through your tired mind. If Constantinople had a relationship status, it would be, it's complicated with everyone. Even now, in its twilight, it's still managing multiple identity crises at once. You wander into a church where candles burn low and icons watch silently. Faces of saints stare back at you with expressions perfected over centuries, solemn, distant, mildly disappointed. People kneel, cross themselves, murmur prayers not for victory but for endurance. That's another shift you notice. The prayers sound less like, "Let us win," and more like, "Let us be spared the worst." The city's population is estimated at perhaps 50,000 at this point, a shadow of its former self, and yet it still feels dense with memory. Every corner has been important at some point. Every street has seen something worth remembering, even if no one wrote it down. You realize that when people talk about the fall of Constantinople, they're compressing centuries of lived experience into a single dramatic phrase. Tonight, none of that compression exists yet. Time is still moving at human speed. From a terrace overlooking the harbor, you watch the last light fade completely. Lamps reflect in the water like broken stars, Ships are anchored, their crews restless but disciplined. The chain across the Golden Horn, the massive iron barrier meant to block enemy fleets, rests quietly, doing its job simply by existing. It's an impressive piece of engineering, heavy enough to stop ships, symbolic enough to inspire confidence. You find yourself oddly reassured by it, which is exactly the point. Historians still argue whether Constantinople's true strength lay more in its walls or in its myth of invincibility. The two have been reinforcing each other for so long that separating them is almost impossible. Belief, after all, can be a weapon. As night deepens, the temperature drops slightly. You pull your cloak tighter, acutely aware that this is only the beginning. No siege engines are in motion yet. No cannon fire shakes the ground. The end of a world, it turns out, does not announce itself with fireworks. It arrives quietly, like dusk, asking you to notice what you still have before it's gone. You take one last look across the city, committing details to memory. The uneven rooftops, the distant glow of Hagia Sophia, the wall standing firm against the dark. You don't know yet which of these things will still be here in a few weeks. Neither do the people around you. That uncertainty hangs in the air, heavier than fear, heavier than hope. And so you remain, breathing slowly, present in a moment balanced delicately between survival and legend, as Constantinople settles into sleep, unaware that history is already sharpening its pen. You wake before sunrise to a sound that doesn't belong to the city's usual rhythm. It's low, metallic, and distant, like thunder that has learned patience. For a moment, half asleep, you almost dismiss it as weather rolling in from the Sea of Marmara. Then it comes again. Deeper this time. Heavier. The stones beneath you seem to notice before your mind does. Outside, Constantinople is stirring earlier than usual. The sky is pale, undecided, caught between night and morning. You step into the street and immediately feel that subtle shift, the way people move when something important is finally being admitted out loud. No one is running. No one is screaming. But conversations are shorter. Faces are tighter. Eyes keep drifting east, toward the land walls. The Ottomans have arrived, not in a cinematic rush, but methodically, as if they've been rehearsing this approach for years. Which, inconveniently, they have. Sultan Mehmed II, barely in his early 20s, which somehow makes this worse, has brought an army that dwarfs the city's defenders. Estimates vary wildly, because medieval chroniclers loved exaggeration almost as much as they loved drama. But most modern historians agree the Ottoman force numbers somewhere between 60,000 and 80,000 men. Inside Constantinople, there are perhaps 7,000 defenders. That includes everyone: professional soldiers, mercenaries, volunteers, and men who were bakers last week. A mainstream historical fact settles in quietly. The defense of Constantinople relies heavily on foreign mercenaries, particularly a small but crucial contingent of Genoese soldiers led by Giovanni Giustiniani. He knows siege warfare. He knows walls. And right now, knowing walls is a marketable skill. You make your way toward the landward side of the city, following the low hum of activity. The Theodosian walls rise ahead of you again, but now they feel different. Yesterday, they were monuments. Today, they are job descriptions. Guards move along the battlements, checking equipment, testing ropes, exchanging murmured instructions. The mood isn't heroic. It's professional. This is what preparation actually looks like. Mostly inventory and quiet swearing. Beyond the walls, spread across the rolling hills, the Ottoman camp is coming into focus. Tents dot the landscape in disciplined clusters, banners catching the early light. Smoke curls upward from cooking fires. It's disturbingly orderly. There's no sense of chaos, no sign of a horde barely held together. This is an army that expects to be here for a while. And then you see it, the cannon. Even from a distance, it's unmistakable. Long, thick, and resting on a massive wooden frame reinforced with iron. This is not a typical medieval siege engine. This is something new, something transitional, a weapon from the future, awkwardly introduced into a world that isn't ready for it. The largest of these cannons, often called the Basilica or simply the Great Cannon, was designed by a Hungarian engineer named Urban. It can fire stone balls weighing hundreds of kilograms. The thing takes hours to reload, sometimes cracks under its own stress, and occasionally kills the people operating it. But when it works, it changes the rules of siege warfare. You feel a strange, delayed unease. The walls you've been admiring were built to resist ladders, towers, and rams, not concentrated explosive force. Historians still argue whether Constantinople could have survived the siege without gunpowder artillery involved. What isn't debated is that these cannons introduce a new kind of pressure, psychological as much as physical. Inside the city, Emperor Constantine XI moves through his domain with the calm intensity of a man who knows there will be no sequel. He is not particularly wealthy, not especially powerful by imperial standards, and yet he carries himself with deliberate dignity. He knows the odds. Everyone with basic arithmetic skills does. Still, there is something stubbornly Roman about his refusal to leave. A quirky tidbit surfaces here. Constantine XI is technically the last Roman emperor, even though he would not have used that phrasing. The Byzantines called themselves Romans until the very end. The Byzantine Empire label is something historians came up with later, which means no one living through this moment knows they're about to become a footnote with a rebranded name. You walk along the inner side of the walls, listening to the first test shots from the Ottoman artillery. The ground vibrates. Dust trickles down from mortar seams that have held firm for centuries. Each impact is followed by a long pause, as if the earth itself is waiting to see what happens next. The walls don't collapse, not yet, but the sound lingers in your chest longer than you'd like. Civilians are being moved away from the most vulnerable sections. Churches fill with people praying not just for divine intervention, but for time. Time for reinforcements. Time for diplomacy. Time for a miracle that doesn't feel completely unreasonable given the city's track record. You overhear arguments near a gate. Some insist Western fleets are already on their way. Others point out that help from Catholic Europe often comes wrapped in conditions, especially theological ones. The East-West schism still matters here. Even now, with an army at the gates, doctrinal disputes hover awkwardly in the background like unresolved family drama. A light, sleepy joke slips in despite everything. Nothing says impending doom like arguing about theology while cannons warm up outside. The Ottomans settle in with unsettling confidence. Mehmed orders trenches dug, artillery positions reinforced, and supply lines secured. This isn't a reckless assault. It's a siege designed to grind down morale as much as masonry. Every day that passes favors the attackers. Every day drains the defenders. You notice how sound changes as the siege rhythm establishes itself. The city no longer has true silence. There is always something. Distant hammering, shouted orders, the occasional thunder of cannon fire. Even at night, the darkness hums. Historians still argue whether Mehmed expected a quick victory or was fully prepared for a prolonged siege. His actions suggest patience, but his age suggests ambition. Either way, Constantinople is no longer an abstract goal. It is a physical problem he intends to solve. As evening returns, you stand once more on the walls, looking out over the Ottoman camp lit by thousands of small fires. It resembles a second city, mirroring the one you stand in, but younger, hungrier, and far less burdened by memory. Inside Constantinople, lamps flicker on again. People eat. Children are told stories. Life continues, stubbornly, because that's what life does right up until it doesn't. You realize that the fall of a world isn't one moment. It's a process. And tonight, that process has officially begun. Morning arrives with a strange sense of normalcy, which somehow makes everything worse. You wake to bells, footsteps, the smell of bread baking somewhere deeper in the city. Constantinople has survived sieges before, many of them. The instinct to keep going is older than fear. Still, as you step outside, you feel it immediately. The city has shrunk inward. Streets feel narrower, conversations quieter, pauses longer. You walk through neighborhoods that once buzzed with imperial confidence. Marble columns still stand, but many are chipped, repurposed, or half-buried into newer, poorer constructions. This is no longer the capital of a world-spanning empire. This is an old giant, living carefully on memories, routines, and faith. A mainstream historical fact settles in as you observe daily life. By 1453, the Byzantine Empire has been reduced almost entirely to Constantinople itself, a few surrounding villages, and the distant Morea in southern Greece. What was once Rome's eastern half, stretching across the Mediterranean, is now essentially a fortified city-state clinging to relevance. Markets are open, but thinner. You see fewer luxury goods, more basics. Grain, olive oil, dried fish. Prices are higher than they should be, because everyone knows supply lines are about to become a concept rather than a reality. Merchants weigh scales carefully, not out of greed alone, but because miscalculation now could mean hunger later. You pass a school where children are still being taught. The lessons are quieter, more deliberate. Greek letters scratched carefully into wax tablets. Psalms murmured rather than sung. Education here has always been a quiet act of defiance, a belief that continuity matters, even when the future feels aggressively optional. A quirky tidbit drifts into your awareness. Some families keep emergency icons, small painted panels of saints, packed and ready, not to flee, but to bury. The idea is that if the city falls, at least the holy images might survive underground, waiting for a better age. It's equal parts faith, superstition, and long-term planning in a world that rarely rewards any of those. As you move closer to the city center, the scale of decline becomes clearer. The Great Palace complex is largely abandoned now, its vast halls too expensive to maintain. Imperial ceremonies have been simplified over generations, trimmed down like an old robe passed from emperor to emperor. Hagia Sophia still dominates the skyline, though, immense and calm, as if unaware that history is pacing nervously outside. You step inside briefly. The interior smells of incense and stone. Light filters down from the dome, catching gold mosaics that have watched empires argue, fracture, and age. People pray quietly, not loudly, not dramatically. This is tired prayer, the kind that asks not for miracles but for endurance. Historians still argue whether Constantinople's population at this point is closer to 50,000 or 100,000. Either way, it's a fraction of what it once was. Entire districts are underpopulated, some almost rural in feel, with gardens and livestock grazing where dense housing once stood. The city hasn't just shrunk politically, it has physically hollowed out. You notice how this changes defense. Fewer people means fewer hands to man walls, repair breaches, carry water, and haul stones. It also means more space to retreat into, more flexibility. Survival here has always been about adaptation rather than numbers. Near one of the forums, you hear raised voices. A small group debates whether the emperor should have left earlier, whether aligning more fully with the Catholic West might have brought help sooner. Others snap back that surrendering religious identity would have hollowed the city out faster than any cannon. The argument goes in circles, like it has for decades. A gentle joke slips in, because humans insist on it. Apparently, nothing unites people like arguing about who should have done something differently 20 years ago. You continue toward the sea walls, where the water glints calmly, almost offensively serene. Ships bob in the harbor. Some are merchant vessels, some warships, some barely seaworthy relics pressed back into service. The sea has always been Constantinople's strength and its vulnerability. Control the water, and you control the city's breath. Rumors drift through the docks. Venetian help. Genoese hesitation. Papal promises tied up in paperwork and theology. Everyone knows someone who heard something from someone else. Hope spreads like fog, thin, patchy, and easily burned away by sunlight. As afternoon settles in, the cannons resume. You feel them now even when you don't hear them. Small tremors through your feet, a faint shiver in the air. Repairs begin almost immediately. Teams rush out after each bombardment, patching cracks with stone, earth, and sheer determination. It's like watching someone repeatedly fix a dam with their bare hands. Historians still argue whether morale or material shortages posed the greater threat to the defenders. Standing here, you suspect the answer is time. Time erodes both. As night falls, lamps flicker on across the city again. From above, Constantinople must look peaceful. Golden lights scattered across dark stone, framed by water on all sides. From inside, it feels like living inside a memory that hasn't realized it's about to be archived. You lie down eventually, listening to distant impacts and whispered prayers through thin walls. The empire may be reduced, but it is not yet silent. And as long as it breathes, it resists, if only by continuing to exist one more night. You feel the pressure before you fully understand it. It's in the way the air seems heavier when you walk the streets, in how conversations pause whenever someone mentions the horizon. The Ottoman presence is no longer just visible. It's palpable, like a low-frequency hum that never quite leaves your ears. Constantinople is still standing, still breathing, but it now exists under a shadow that grows longer by the hour. From the walls, the view has changed again. The Ottoman camp has expanded with unsettling efficiency. Where there were scattered tents days ago, there are now orderly rows, supply wagons, makeshift forges, and lines of men moving with practiced coordination. This isn't an army improvising. This is an empire rehearsing its future. A mainstream historical fact anchors this moment. By the mid-15th century, the Ottoman state has become one of the most sophisticated military and administrative powers in the region, blending Turkic, Islamic, Persian, and Byzantine traditions into a highly functional system. This isn't a tribal horde at the gates. It's a centralized machine with clear command, steady logistics, and a long memory of previous failures. You watch Mehmed II from a distance one afternoon, or at least you think you do. He rides through the camp surrounded by advisors, guards, and engineers. He's young, uncomfortably young for someone orchestrating the end of a millennium-old empire, but there's nothing impulsive in his movements. He listens more than he speaks. When he does speak, people lean in. Historians still argue whether Mehmed was driven more by personal ambition or by a broader ideological vision of empire. Standing here, watching the camp move like a single organism, you suspect it's both. Ambition gives direction. Systems give power. The Ottomans have learned from every failed siege of Constantinople before this one. They don't rush the walls. They don't throw men away for glory. Instead, they tighten the ring. Supply routes are cut. Communication is monitored. Pressure is applied steadily, predictably, like water against stone. You notice something unsettling. Morale in the Ottoman camp seems calm, not jubilant, not frenzied, just confident. Soldiers pray, eat, sharpen tools, joke quietly. They expect this to take time, but they also expect to win. That expectation alone feels like a weapon. Inside the city, the contrast is sharp. You pass a group of defenders hauling stones to repair a damaged section of wall. Their movements are quick but tired. Everyone is conserving energy, even as the work increases. Food is rationed more carefully now. Bread is thinner, Soup more watery. No one complains out loud. A quirky tidbit surfaces in the middle of all this tension. Some Ottoman soldiers reportedly bring small personal libraries with them on campaign, religious texts, poetry, even manuals on engineering. Warfare here isn't just physical, it's intellectual. Knowledge travels with the army, and that knowledge is being applied very specifically to the problem of these walls. You climb the battlements again and watch Ottoman engineers measure distances, adjust angles, and argue over calculations. Every cannon shot is logged, observed, refined. When a stone ball strikes the wall, men immediately mark the damage, noting where the masonry weakens. This is not brute force, it's experimentation. The walls respond, slowly, stubbornly. Repairs continue day and night. Teams of civilians, monks, and soldiers work side by side, hauling debris, mixing mortar, reinforcing vulnerable points with whatever materials are available. Wooden beams, earth, rubble. Faith, if it could be stacked like bricks, would be doing most of the work. Historians still argue whether the defenders truly believed Western reinforcements would arrive. Some sources suggest genuine hope. Others imply it was a psychological necessity, rather than a realistic expectation. You hear rumors daily. Venetian fleet spotted, Genoese debates ongoing, papal letters en route. Hope here behaves like a fragile currency, overused, easily devalued, but impossible to abandon. At night, the Ottomans light their campfires deliberately. Thousands of them. The effect is theatrical and strategic. From the walls, it looks like the land itself is burning, ringed with stars that shouldn't be there. Some defenders turn away. Others stare back stubbornly, counting fires like they might count sheep. Anything to keep fear from settling too deeply. A light joke drifts through the defenders one evening. At least the Ottomans are kind enough to provide mood lighting. Laughter follows, thin but real. You notice Mehmet's patience again. He does not order a full assault. Not yet. He waits for weakness, for exhaustion, for a mistake. Every day, the city holds out, costs him supplies and men. But it costs Constantinople far more. The sea, once a source of comfort, now feels uncertain. The Golden Horn remains blocked by its massive chain, but Ottoman ships patrol outside relentlessly. You sense that the attackers are studying the water with the same intensity they study the walls. Somewhere, a solution is forming. Inside the city, religious processions become more frequent. Icons are carried along the streets. Hymns echo against stone. Some find comfort in it, others find unease. Faith here is both anchor and accelerant. It steadies, but it also magnifies fear. Historians still argue whether religious unity helped or hindered the defense. The recent attempts to reconcile Orthodox and Catholic churches created resentment as much as hope. Standing among these crowds, you feel the strain of a city asked to compromise its identity in exchange for survival. Never an easy trade. As days pass, the bombardment becomes routine. Impact, repair, silence, repeat. You realize how dangerous routine can be. When disaster becomes normal, vigilance dulls. Fatigue seeps in. Even fear gets tired. One evening, as you lean against the wall, you feel the stone vibrate beneath your palm. Not from a hit, but from the anticipation of the next one. The walls have held for 1,000 years. But they were never meant to hold forever. You look out across the Ottoman camp again. The fires burn steadily. The cannons rest, patient and ominous. Somewhere out there, plans are being refined, options weighed, timelines adjusted. And inside Constantinople, life continues in compressed form. Smaller meals, quieter prayers, shorter tempers, longer nights. The world hasn't ended yet, but it's leaning forward, waiting for the moment when resistance finally gives way to gravity. You begin to understand that this siege is not just happening to Constantinople, it is happening for someone. The longer you watch the Ottoman camp, the clearer it becomes that everything here bends toward a single will. Orders ripple outward with remarkable coherence, and at the center of that flow sits Mehmed II, the young sultan who has decided that history will remember him, one way or another. You don't see him constantly. In fact, that's part of the point. Mehmed does not perform for the walls. He does not ride up dramatically to shake his fist at Constantinople like a villain in a very expensive costume. He stays just distant enough to remain mythic. When he appears, it's brief, deliberate, and purposeful, checking artillery, conferring with engineers, observing drills. He is watching everything, and everyone knows it. A mainstream historical fact anchors this moment firmly. Mehmed II ascended the Ottoman throne for the second time in 1451, after an earlier brief reign as a teenager. Unlike many rulers his age, he came prepared, not just militarily, but intellectually. He spoke multiple languages, studied Roman history obsessively, and saw himself not merely as a conqueror, but as a successor to what is the unsettling part. You hear it whispered among Ottoman officers and foreign observers alike. Mehmed doesn't just want Constantinople because it's strategically useful. He wants it because it means something. The city is Rome's ghost. Take it, and you inherit legitimacy, gravity, destiny. Lose it, and you are just another regional power knocking on old walls. Historians still argue whether Mehmed truly believed himself destined to be a new Roman emperor, or whether this was a carefully cultivated image meant to unify his empire. Watching how deliberately he frames this siege, you suspect the answer is inconveniently both. You spend an afternoon near the edge of the Ottoman camp, close enough to hear conversations but far enough to remain unnoticed. Soldiers speak of the city with a mix of reverence and irritation. They call it stubborn, ancient, arrogant. No one doubts it will fall. The only question is how much effort it will demand first. Mehmed's tent, or rather his command pavilion, is not ostentatious. It's functional, organized, surrounded by scribes, messengers, and engineers. Maps are constantly updated. Reports are reviewed and revised. This is not a ruler waiting for divine intervention. This is a manager of inevitability. A quirky tidbit surfaces here, one that feels oddly modern. Mehmed keeps detailed written notes during the campaign, annotating strategies, outcomes, and adjustments. He treats war less like a heroic saga and more like a long-term project with deliverables. If he had a project manager, they'd be very tired. You learn that Mehmed personally recruited Urban, the cannon engineer, promising him resources the Byzantines could not afford. This wasn't just opportunism, it was targeted investment. Mehmed understands that technology, not tradition, will break these walls. Where earlier sultans tested courage, Mehmed tests physics. The cannons fire again later that day. Each shot is deliberate, timed, observed. Mehmed doesn't need constant bombardment. He needs data. The walls crack incrementally. Morale inside the city frays invisibly. Pressure compounds. Inside Constantinople, people speak Mehmed's name more often now. It's said cautiously, sometimes with disdain, sometimes with grudging respect. He's no longer an abstract enemy. He's a personality pressing against the city's edges. You notice how Emperor Constantine XI is being quietly compared to him, not openly, never openly, but in tone, in size, in resigned glances. Constantine is brave, committed, honorable. Mehmed is effective. History has a cruel habit of favoring effectiveness. Historians still argue whether Constantine and Mehmed are true opposites or distorted reflections of one another. Two rulers bound by legacy, operating under vastly different constraints. Standing between these worlds, you feel the imbalance keenly. One man defends memory. The other manufactures the future. Mehmed walks the lines at night sometimes. You hear this from Ottoman soldiers who speak of it with a mixture of pride and anxiety. He asks questions, he remembers names, he notices mistakes. Leadership here is not distant, it is intimate and exacting. A small, sleepy joke circulates among mercenaries observing from afar. The Sultan is young enough to conquer Constantinople and still have time to regret it later. No one laughs too loudly. You reflect on Mehmed's patience. He does not rush the final blow. He allows fatigue to work for him. Hunger, doubt, routine. He understands something fundamental about sieges. Walls fall twice, once in the mind and once in stone. Inside the city, that mental erosion has begun. Repairs continue, but with less enthusiasm. Arguments flare faster. Sleep comes harder. The cannons have trained everyone's nerves to expect disaster, which paradoxically makes people less responsive when it finally arrives. Historians still argue whether Mehmed deliberately prolonged the siege to exhaust the defenders psychologically, or whether delays were simply logistical necessities. Watching the careful pacing, you suspect intention. He waits not because he must, but because he can. You catch a final glimpse of him one evening as the sun dips low. He stands on a rise, watching the walls absorb another impact. He does not celebrate. He does not react at all. He simply observes, measuring time like a resource. And you realize something unsettling. Mehmed is not just besieging a city. He is rehearsing a new world order, one where empires are built with planning, technology, and relentless focus rather than inherited prestige. Inside Constantinople, the bells ring again. Prayers rise. Stones are lifted back into place. The city resists, because that is what it has always done. But somewhere beyond the walls, a young ruler is calmly waiting for resistance to become irrelevant. You start to notice that the rhythm of the siege has changed. Not dramatically, no sudden charge, no desperate flare of trumpets, but subtly, like a song shifting key while you're not paying attention. The cannon fire has become more precise, less frequent, but more purposeful. Each impact now feels like part of a sentence rather than a shout. This is the moment you realize that technology has officially entered the story as a main character. You make your way back toward the battered stretch of the Theodosian walls, where repairs are already lagging behind damage. The stone here looks tired. Not shattered, just worn down, as if centuries of confidence are finally being asked to justify themselves against gunpowder. A mainstream historical fact settles heavily into place. The siege of Constantinople in 1453 marks one of the first decisive uses of large-scale artillery against medieval fortifications, signaling the beginning of the end for traditional castle walls across Europe. These defenses were engineering marvels of their time, but their time has quietly expired. The cannons themselves are monstrous things. Some are hauled by dozens of oxen. Others require teams of men just to reload. They roar, then rest. Roar, then rest. The pauses between shots are almost worse than the blasts themselves. In the silence, defenders inspect cracks, measure sagging stone, and wonder which section will fail next. You watch Ottoman engineers work with unsettling calm. They sketch, argue, adjust angles, and take notes after every firing. When a cannon misfires or cracks, it's logged as a lesson, not a disaster. Failure here is simply part of refinement. A quirky tidbit drifts into your awareness. One of the massive cannons reportedly cracked after repeated firings, injuring crew members and forcing temporary repairs. Instead of abandoning the approach, Mehmed ordered adjustments and continued. The lesson wasn't, "This doesn't work." It was, "This needs tuning." Very modern energy, honestly. Inside the city, defenders respond with ingenuity of their own. They pack breaches with earth and timber, which absorb impact better than stone alone. They lower makeshift barriers behind damaged sections, creating layers of defense where once there was just one proud wall. The city is turning itself into a patchwork of survival tactics. You help, at least in spirit, hauling rubble, passing stones, listening to shouted instructions that blur together as fatigue sets in. Everyone smells like dust, sweat, and smoke. The air itself feels grainy now, as if the city is slowly being ground down into its component parts. Historians still argue whether Constantinople's defenses could have adapted enough to withstand sustained artillery fire indefinitely. Some suggest that with more manpower and supplies, the layered defenses might have held longer. Others argue that once heavy cannons entered the equation, the outcome was only a matter of time. Standing here, watching walls bruise rather than break, you feel the truth hovering uncomfortably between those positions. At night, the cannons fall silent, but not the work. Repairs continue by torchlight, prayers overlap with hammer blows, monks pass buckets, soldiers do masonry. Social roles blur under pressure. Survival doesn't care what you used to do for a living. A light joke sneaks in among the workers. Apparently, if the empire survives this, everyone qualifies as a professional construction worker. No one disagrees. The psychological effect of the artillery is profound. Even when shots miss, the anticipation drains energy. Sleep comes in fragments. Every rumble jolts nerves awake. You begin to understand that fear doesn't need constant stimulation. It thrives on expectation. Inside homes and churches, people debate what this new warfare means. Some insist God will not allow sacred walls to fall. Others quietly note that God has allowed a lot of sacred things to fall over the centuries. These conversations never end cleanly. You overhear a scholar muttering that the ancient world was built on geometry and stone, while the modern world will be built on chemistry and fire. He sounds both impressed and horrified. Historians still argue whether the Ottomans fully grasped the long-term implications of their artillery use. Were they consciously ushering in a new era of warfare, or simply using the best available tools? Watching how eagerly the technology is embraced, you suspect awareness, even if the full consequences remain abstract. Mehmed inspects the damaged wall personally one afternoon, from a safe distance. He nods. He speaks briefly with his engineers. Orders are adjusted. There's no celebration, no impatience, just confirmation that progress is being made. Inside Constantinople, the mood shifts again. The walls are still standing, but confidence is thinner now. You can hear it in voices, see it in posture. People stop saying if the wall falls and start saying when. Still, resistance continues. Arrows fly. Cannons answer. Repairs follow. The cycle repeats, grinding time into dust. As evening settles, you rest against a stone surface still warm from the day's impacts. You realize something quietly devastating. The walls that once symbolized permanence are now part of a learning curve. And learning curves, unlike empires, don't care how old you are. You start to feel the silence more than the noise now, not the absence of sound. There is always sound, but the gaps between them, the pauses where everyone seems to be waiting for something that refuses to announce itself clearly. The siege has settled into a tense equilibrium. And in that stillness, desperation begins trying on different masks. Today, it wears the face of diplomacy. You hear about it first as a rumor, then as a confirmed fact whispered with equal parts hope and embarrassment. Envoys are moving again. Messages are being drafted, revised, softened, sharpened. Constantinople is speaking outward, not just to the heavens but to the Latin West, to Venice, to Genoa, to the papacy. The city has done this before, many times. Each attempt carries the same quiet question: is now finally bad enough? A mainstream historical fact grounds this moment. In the years leading up to the siege, Emperor Constantine XI formally accepted the union of the churches, a theological reconciliation between the Orthodox and Catholic churches intended to secure Western military aid. It was signed, sealed, and deeply unpopular. You walk past a church where a Latin Mass is being conducted alongside Orthodox rites. The air is thick with incense and unease. Some attend out of genuine hope, others out of political obligation. Many stay away entirely, muttering that they would rather see the city fall than surrender its soul. Historians still argue whether the union of the churches meaningfully increased Constantinople's chances of survival. Some suggest it alienated large portions of the population without delivering substantial aid. Others argue it was the only option left. Standing among these divided pews, you feel how survival strategies can fracture identity long before they save lives. You overhear a sharp exchange between two men near the doors. One insists Western fleets will arrive any day now. Venetian ships, papal banners, maybe even crusading enthusiasm dusted off for one last performance. The other scoffs, pointing out that promises from the West tend to arrive late, conditional, or not at all. They part without resolution, both convinced they are right. A quirky tidbit floats through the city's anxious gossip. Some citizens claim the Virgin Mary has been seen leaving the city in visions, her protection withdrawn. Others claim she has doubled her presence instead. In uncertain times, even divine real estate rumors circulate wildly. You make your way to the docks, where the sea remains deceptively calm. Genoese and Venetian sailors linger near their ships, weighing loyalty against survival. These men are professionals. They fight for contracts, not crusades. Some will stay. Some are already planning their exit routes, just in case the wind changes at the wrong moment. A light, sleepy joke mutters its way through the crowd. Apparently, everyone is waiting for Western help, the way people now wait for customer support emails. Hopeful, frustrated, and refreshing constantly. Beyond the walls, Mehmed waits. He receives messages too. Offers of surrender are discussed, then dismissed. The Sultan is polite but firm. He promises safety for those who yield. He promises consequences for those who do not. His letters are calm, measured, almost generous. They are also very clear. Historians still argue whether Mehmed genuinely hoped for a negotiated surrender to preserve the city, or whether these offers were strategic formalities designed to legitimize conquest. Watching how the artillery resumes after each failed exchange, you suspect that diplomacy here is less a path to peace than a checklist item. Inside Constantinople, time stretches. The siege does not escalate dramatically. That's the problem. Every day of waiting drains resources and resolve. Hunger edges closer. Sleep grows shallow. Patience thins. You sit with a group of citizens one evening as they share stories, half memories, half coping mechanisms, tales of past miracles, of sieges broken at the last moment, of saints intervening when all seemed lost. These stories are told softly, not with confidence, but with the hope that repetition itself might summon protection. Historians still argue whether belief meaningfully bolstered morale or simply delayed the acceptance of reality. From where you sit, belief seems to function less as strategy and more as insulation, a way to soften the mental impact of what everyone can already feel approaching. The bells ring again that night. Processions move through the streets. Candles flicker against stone. The city prays, negotiates, waits. And outside the walls, the Ottomans continue their work uninterrupted. You realize something unsettling as you watch the stars appear over the Marmara. Diplomacy, like walls, is strongest before it is tested. Once tested, it either holds or quietly becomes part of the rubble. For now, Constantinople still stands, still speaks, still hopes. But the silence between messages is growing longer. You begin to feel it splitting down the middle. Not the walls, not yet, but the city itself. The tension that has been humming quietly now sharpens, like a hairline crack widening under pressure. Constantinople isn't just besieged from the outside anymore. It's wrestling with itself. Faith, which once felt like a shared shelter, has become a fault line. You walk through neighborhoods where icons hang from doorways, candles burning low beneath them. In some streets, Latin chants drift out of churches newly aligned with Rome. In others, Orthodox hymns swell louder than usual, almost defiant, as if volume alone might restore theological boundaries. People nod politely to one another, but something brittle has crept into their gestures. A mainstream historical fact anchors this fracture. The union of the churches, officially proclaimed in Constantinople shortly before the siege, deeply divided the population. While Emperor Constantine XI supported it as a political necessity, many clergy and citizens viewed it as betrayal, spiritual surrender in exchange for military aid that had yet to materialize. You pause near a small square where an argument has drawn a crowd. A monk denounces the union openly, his voice sharp with conviction. Across from him, a court official counters with exhausted pragmatism. Without unity, any unity, the city has no chance. The crowd shifts, murmurs rising, then dissolves without resolution. No one wins. No one convinces anyone else. Historians still argue whether internal religious divisions significantly weakened Constantinople's defense. Some suggest it undermined morale and cooperation. Others argue that by this point, material shortages mattered far more than ideology. Standing in these uneasy streets, you feel how division doesn't need to stop people from working. It just makes the work heavier. A quirky tidbit surfaces quietly. Some Orthodox believers reportedly preferred the phrase, quote, "better the Turkish turban than the Latin mitre," a grim expression of how deep resentment toward the Catholic West ran. It's less a policy statement than an emotional reflex. But emotions have weight, especially under siege. You continue toward Hagia Sophia again, drawn there by a strange mix of habit and gravity. Inside, the atmosphere is thick with competing prayers. Some whisper for salvation through compromise. Others pray for purity through suffering. The dome above absorbs it all without comment. The building itself feels timeless, almost indifferent. It has watched emperors crowned, councils convened, mobs riot, and fires rage. One siege more doesn't impress it. People, however, are far less durable. Outside, soldiers try to ignore the debates. They focus on repairs, patrols, drills. But even they aren't immune. You hear grumbles about trust, about loyalty, about whether certain neighborhoods will hold if the walls fail nearby. Suspicion creeps in where solidarity once lived. A light joke, strained but sincere, circulates among defenders. Apparently, nothing brings out theological nuance like imminent invasion. The laughter that follows is short, but it helps. Across the no-man's land, Mehmed is watching all of this unfold without ever setting foot inside the city. His spies move quietly. His interpreters listen carefully. He understands something essential. A divided city doesn't fall faster. It falls easier. Historians still argue whether Mehmed actively encouraged internal division through propaganda and rumor, or whether Constantinople fractured entirely on its own. Watching how neatly Ottoman patience aligns with Byzantine discord, you suspect he didn't need to push very hard. At night, the processions continue, but they no longer feel unified. Separate groups move through different streets, carrying different icons, chanting different prayers. The city's spiritual map now mirrors its political fragility. You stand at a crossroads and watch two processions pass without acknowledging one another. Candles flicker. Feet shuffle. Faith moves in parallel lines that refuse to intersect. The cannons fire again before dawn. Not dramatically, just enough to remind everyone that theology debates do not reinforce stone. As daylight returns, you sense a quiet resignation settling in. Not defeat, not yet, but a weary acceptance that unity, like time, is something Constantinople no longer has in abundance. The walls still stand. The city still resists. But inside, fractures are learning how to breathe. The siege doesn't announce its next phase. It simply tightens. You notice it first in the way movement becomes restricted. Gates open less often. Boats leave the harbor cautiously, if at all. The space around Constantinople, the invisible bubble of possibility it once relied on, shrinks until the city feels like it's holding its breath. The Ottomans have completed their ring. A mainstream historical fact anchors this shift. By early April 1453, Mehmed II has successfully blockaded Constantinople by land and sea, coordinating his army and navy to cut off resupply and reinforcement. This is no longer a test of walls alone. It's a test of endurance. You walk the sea walls again, watching Ottoman ships patrol just beyond reach. Their sails move steadily, confidently, tracing patterns that say we're not going anywhere. The water still looks calm, but it no longer feels like an escape route. It feels like a mirror, reflecting how closed the city has become. Inside Constantinople, routines adapt. Meals shrink further. Bread is stretched with fillers. Soup becomes a concept more than a substance. People stop pretending this is temporary. Rationing becomes systematic, careful, quietly brutal. Historians still argue whether starvation posed a decisive threat during the siege or whether the city fell before hunger could fully take hold. From where you stand, hunger is already doing its work. Not dramatic, not sudden, but steady. It saps patience. It shortens tempers. It makes every cannon blast feel heavier. You pass through a neighborhood, near the walls where families have moved into basements and cellars, closer to what feels like safety. Children play quieter games. Adults speak in half sentences. Everyone is listening all the time. A quirky tidbit surfaces here. Some residents keep lists, not of possessions, but of places to run if certain sections of wall collapse. The lists change daily as damage spreads. It's urban planning in survival mode. At the docks, tension rises between sailors and city officials. Some Genoese captains want to leave while they still can. Others are contractually bound, morally committed, or simply trapped by shifting winds and Ottoman patrols. Every ship that departs weakens morale, even if it carries no soldiers. A light joke slips through a dockside argument. Apparently, abandoning Constantinople at the last moment is a proud Mediterranean tradition. No one laughs very hard. Beyond the walls, Mehmed tightens control with methodical calm. Patrols increase. Night operations expand. The Ottomans probe defenses constantly, not with full assaults but with tests. Small attacks, feints, distractions. Every response is noted, every weakness logged. Historians still argue whether these probing attacks were designed primarily to gather intelligence or to exhaust defenders psychologically. Watching how quickly alarms are raised and how slowly everyone relaxes afterward, you suspect the answer is both. Inside the city, sleep becomes a luxury. Guards rotate constantly. Bells ring at odd hours, false alarms become common, and each one drains a little more energy. The human nervous system was not designed for sustained anticipation. You sit on the wall one night, watching the moon reflect off the Golden Horn. The massive chain still blocks the harbor entrance, a symbol of stubborn ingenuity. For now it holds. But you sense that the Ottomans are studying it with the same intensity they once studied the walls. Faith remains present but quieter now. Prayers are shorter, less performative. People ask not for victory, but for survival, for clarity, for mercy, for strength to endure whatever comes next. Historians still argue whether the defenders truly believed the city could be saved at this stage. Some sources suggest grim realism had already set in. Others point to continued resistance as evidence of hope. From where you sit, hope and realism seem to be coexisting uneasily, sharing the same tired body. As dawn breaks, cannons fire again. not at random, but in sequence. Impact. Pause. Impact. Each shot is a reminder that time is no longer neutral. It belongs to the attackers now. You feel it in your bones. The siege has crossed a threshold. The city is no longer waiting to see if something happens. It is waiting to see what breaks first. You stop thinking in terms of days. The siege has blurred time into a continuous stretch of effort, fatigue, and waiting. Morning and night still exist, technically, but they feel like variations of the same long moment. What matters now is rhythm. Bombardment, repair, patrol, prayer, sleep. If sleep happens at all. Life under bombardment has become its own strange routine. A mainstream historical fact anchors this phase clearly. During the siege, Ottoman artillery fires almost continuously for weeks, concentrating on key sections of the Theodosian walls, particularly near the gate of St. Romanus. The goal is no longer testing, it is wearing the city down, one calculated fracture at a time. You spend much of the day near that sector, where damage is worst. The wall here no longer looks like a single structure. It's a collage of original stone, fresh rubble, wooden braces, and packed earth. From a distance, it still appears solid. Up close, it feels like a body held together with bandages. Civilians and soldiers work side by side now without comment. Titles have evaporated. Everyone lifts stones. Everyone carries water. Everyone knows where to run when the cannons fire again. This is what total war looks like before the term exists. A quirky tidbit surfaces amid the exhaustion. Some defenders swear they can tell which cannon is firing based on sound alone. They give them nicknames. That one cracks stone. That one kills sleep. It's a small act of control in a situation defined by helplessness. Historians still argue whether the defenders' rapid repair efforts significantly delayed the Ottoman breakthrough or merely postponed the inevitable. Watching men rebuild walls that will be hit again within hours, you feel how effort itself becomes the point. Repairing is resistance, even when it doesn't last. Inside the city, homes closest to the walls empty out. Families relocate deeper into Constantinople, carrying what they can. Mattresses, icons, cooking pots, memories. Streets fill with quiet caravans moving inward, like a tide flowing the wrong direction. Food distribution becomes stricter. Rations are now officially measured, not estimated. You notice how quickly people adapt, how little complaint there is once rules become clear. Hunger is easier to endure when it's predictable. A light joke circulates in a breadline. The city may fall, but at least everyone will finally agree on portion sizes. It earns a tired smile. At night, bombardment slows, but it never fully stops. Sleep comes in fragments, punctured by alarms, impacts, or simply the expectation of them. You lie awake listening to the city breathe. Footsteps on stone, whispered prayers through walls. The occasional crack of masonry settling under stress. Historians still argue whether fear or exhaustion was the greater psychological burden on the defenders. From where you lie, fear has sharp edges, but exhaustion is heavier. It doesn't spike. It presses. You attend a brief service one evening in a small church, repurposed as a shelter. Candles flicker against soot-darkened walls. The prayers are short, practical. There is no sermon about victory. Only endurance, only forgiveness, only whatever comes next. Outside, Ottoman soldiers rotate shifts with discipline. You can see it from the walls, the way one group replaces another smoothly, without chaos. They are tired too, but their fatigue is managed, supplied, scheduled. That difference matters. Historians still argue whether Mehmed intended to preserve the city's infrastructure or accepted heavy damage as the cost of conquest. Watching where the cannons aim, you suspect calculation. Damage is concentrated. The city is being opened, not erased. As days pass, something subtle changes in how people move. They stop flinching as much. Not because danger has passed, but because constant stress has burned out the reflex. This numbness is more frightening than panic. You lean against a wall one afternoon, feeling vibrations pass through stone into bone. You wonder, not for the first time, how many generations believed these walls would outlast anything. They almost did. As dusk falls, fires burn across the Ottoman camp again. Inside the city, lamps glow faintly behind shuttered windows. Two worlds, separated by stone and centuries, press closer together with every passing hour. Life under bombardment continues. Not heroic, not dramatic, just stubborn and very, very tired. By now, the walls no longer feel like the edge of the world. They feel like a membrane, thin, strained, and increasingly transparent. You sense what lies on the other side not as an abstract threat, but as a physical presence. Sound travels more clearly. Voices carry. Metal rings against metal with a familiarity that makes distance feel dishonest. A documented shift occurs around this stage of the siege. Mehmed II intensifies psychological pressure alongside artillery fire. Drums, horns, shouted chants, especially at night, become more frequent. The goal is not just to break stone, but to prevent rest. You experience this most clearly after sunset. The darkness is never quiet anymore. Even when cannons pause, something fills the gap. Rhythmic beating, low chanting, the restless movement of tens of thousands of bodies that refuse to let the city forget they are there. Inside Constantinople, people begin sleeping in their clothes. This is not recorded in any chronicle as a formal change, but it appears again and again in personal accounts from other sieges of the era. Boots remain on. Belts stay fastened. Cloaks are used as blankets. The city has entered a state where readiness outweighs comfort. A small but telling historical detail surfaces here. The defenders start using bells not just for prayer or alarms, but for coordination. Short patterns signal breaches, fires, troop movement. Sound becomes infrastructure when sight lines fail. You notice how quickly people learn the language of these bells. No one asks what they mean. Bodies move before thoughts do. A certain pattern sends people toward the walls. Another pulls them inward. Civilization reduces itself to reaction. Repairs continue, but they are slower now. Fatigue is cumulative. Hands shake more. Arguments flare briefly and extinguish just as fast. There's no energy left to sustain anger. One afternoon, a cannon shot collapses a section of outer wall entirely. For a moment, the breach is open to the sky. You can see Ottoman soldiers clearly through the dust. Faces, armor, banners rippling. Then the defenders rush in, filling the gap with earth, wood, and bodies. Historians note that these emergency barricades, called inner breastworks, are crucial in delaying the final assault. Watching one rise, you understand why. It's ugly, uneven, improvised. But it absorbs force. It buys hours. Sometimes minutes. And at this point, minutes matter. Inside the city, rumors multiply. Some say Western fleets are days away. Others insist no help is coming at all. Both versions circulate simultaneously, and people choose whichever allows them to keep functioning. Hope and resignation coexist without conflict. A priest quietly admits to you that he has stopped trying to interpret signs. If God speaks, he says, he will have to speak loudly. That night, the chanting outside the walls grows louder than before. Ottoman soldiers sing verses promising reward, glory, paradise. The sound rolls across the stone like surf. Some defenders shout back insults. Others stay silent. You lie awake, counting the seconds between cannon shots. You realize you've started measuring time not by hours but by impacts. This one shook dust from the ceiling. That one cracked a brace. That one hit somewhere else, someone else's problem. A historical aside intrudes gently here. Mehmed II is only 21 years old, younger than many of the men repairing the walls he is trying to break. The siege is not just a military operation, it is a declaration of legitimacy. Constantinople is the key to empire. Inside the city, Emperor Constantine XI is everywhere and nowhere. You hear stories of him inspecting walls, sharing rations, praying barefoot. Whether all of them are true matters less than the fact that people believe them. Belief at this stage is structural. Toward dawn, a brief silence falls. No drums, no chanting. Even the cannons rest. The quiet is so complete it feels artificial. Veteran soldiers recognize it immediately. This is not mercy. This is preparation. As light slowly returns to the sky, the city holds its breath, not in fear, exactly, but in anticipation. Something is changing. You can feel it in the way men stand straighter, the way conversations stop mid-sentence, the way even exhaustion seems to retreat slightly, making room for what comes next. The siege is no longer grinding forward, it is gathering itself. The silence breaks just after dawn, and it does not break gently. It arrives as a coordinated roar, drums, horns, cannon fire, shouting, layered so densely that your mind struggles to separate one sound from another. The Ottomans have learned something important over the weeks. Chaos is louder than fear. Noise itself becomes a weapon, shaking focus loose from exhausted bodies. This is the beginning of the large, probing assaults. Not the final one, not yet, but close enough that everyone inside the city understands the distinction is thinning. These attacks are meant to test repairs, exhaust defenders, identify weak sections, and, perhaps most importantly, condition the city to the idea that the real storm could arrive at any moment. You move to the walls almost automatically now. No orders needed, no speeches, just movement. What you see is not a single mass of attackers, but waves, irregular, pulsing forward and pulling back. Light infantry rush the breaches first, forcing defenders to reveal their positions. Arrows follow. Then cannon fire resumes, pounding areas where resistance concentrates. A mainstream historical fact anchors this moment. Mehmed II deliberately uses irregular troops, often poorly equipped, as the first attackers, preserving his elite janissaries for later. It's brutal arithmetic. Lives are spent to gain information. From the wall, you notice something unsettling. The attackers don't seem rushed, there's no frenzy. They advance, retreat, regroup. Discipline hums beneath the noise. Inside the city, discipline feels thinner. Defenders rotate less effectively now. There simply aren't enough rested bodies. Men fight, repair, then fight again with barely a pause. Food is rationed down further. Thin porridge, hard bread, water measured carefully. Someone jokes that even the rats look underfed. No one laughs, but the attempt is appreciated. A quirky tidbit surfaces here, passed quietly among soldiers. Some defenders carry small personal relics sewn into their clothes. Saints, bones, fragments of icons, bits of blessed cloth. Not for courage exactly, but for identity. If they die, they want something to say who they were. Historians still argue whether morale inside Constantinople truly collapsed in these final weeks, or merely transformed into something quieter and more fatalistic. From where you stand, it feels less like despair and more like narrowing. Options vanish. Focus sharpens. During one assault, an Ottoman banner briefly rises on a partially collapsed wall section. For a breathless moment, it flaps there, red against gray stone. Then it falls. The defenders surge, shouting, stabbing, pushing bodies back into the breach. Earth and timber fly. Someone loses a helmet and keeps fighting anyway, hair plastered to his face with sweat and dust. Afterward, no one celebrates. The banner's fall feels temporary, provisional, like postponing a verdict rather than winning a case. Emperor Constantine XI appears again, this time unmistakably real. You see him dismount near a damaged section, armor dusty, face drawn. He speaks to men by name. Whether he truly knows them or simply speaks convincingly doesn't matter. Presence itself becomes a tool. A historian would later write that Constantine's leadership was symbolic more than strategic by this stage. Standing there, watching him lift debris alongside everyone else, you understand why symbols sometimes outlast strategies. The attacks continue through the day in grinding cycles. When night falls, the Ottomans do not retreat far. Fires burn in their camps, visible from the walls like a second constellation stitched into the earth. The psychological weight of that sight is enormous. Sleep comes in fragments. You dream of walls breathing, expanding, contracting, cracking with each breath. You wake to horns, or drums, or nothing at all, which somehow feels worse. Another historical detail threads through the exhaustion. Ottoman engineers begin moving cannons closer, under cover of darkness. This is dangerous work, slow and exposed. Yet it happens steadily. Distance shrinks. Impact grows. By the next morning, cannon shots land with sharper violence. Stone doesn't just crumble, it bursts. A debate persists among historians here. Was the fall of Constantinople inevitable by this point, or could different defensive choices have altered the outcome? Watching the walls absorb blow after blow, patched with rubble and resolve, inevitability feels less like fate and more like pressure applied consistently enough. Inside the city, religious processions begin again, not triumphal, but desperate. Icons are carried along the walls. Prayers blur into murmurs. Even skeptics participate, because participation itself becomes a form of solidarity. You catch yourself whispering along, despite not knowing the words. Late one evening, a rumor spreads faster than any prayer. The Ottomans are preparing for a final, all-out assault. No one knows how or when. Only the preparations are visible. Troop movements, unusual quiets, changes in camp layout. The city responds not with panic, but with stillness. Weapons are checked. Wounds are bound. Confessions are whispered. Letters are written with no expectation of delivery. A man beside you sharpens his sword slowly, deliberately. He admits he's never used it in battle before. You tell him it's a good-looking sword. This is not a lie. It's also not reassurance. Somewhere beyond the walls, Mehmed II plans. Maps. Orders. Timing. He has learned the city's rhythms now. The way it reacts, the way it bleeds, the way it endures. Inside, the city prepares in its own way, not to win, but to meet what comes standing. The walls hold, for now, but they no longer feel eternal. They feel borrowed. Night settles unevenly now, as if darkness itself hesitates before fully committing. You feel it in the air, thicker, heavier, charged with expectation. This is no ordinary night. It carries the strange stillness that comes before a storm that everyone can already hear forming beyond the horizon. Constantine XI knows it too. You see him again, moving through the city with a pace that is steady but unmistakably urgent. He no longer inspects walls for reassurance. He inspects people, faces, hands, eyes. He stops often, speaks briefly, listens closely. The emperor of what was once half the known world now governs through eye contact and presence. A mainstream historical fact anchors this moment clearly. On the eve of the final assault, Constantine XI addressed his remaining defenders, urging them to fight not only for their lives, but for their faith, their families, and the legacy of Rome itself. It is one of the last recorded imperial speeches in Byzantine history. You don't hear the speech directly. Instead, you hear echoes of it, passed from mouth to mouth, paraphrased and reshaped by exhaustion. In one version, he speaks of glory. In another, duty. In another, forgiveness. What remains consistent is the ending. He will not leave. That matters. Inside the city, churches glow late into the night. Candles burn until wax pools thickly at their bases. Incense hangs in the air, heavy enough to taste. People crowd together, nobles beside laborers, soldiers beside monks, skeptics beside believers, because hierarchy collapses easily when endings feel near. You slip into Hagia Sophia almost without thinking. The vastness of it still startles you. Even now, especially now. Its dome floats above like a second sky, cracked but enduring. Voices echo softly, layered into something almost musical. Not quite hope. Not quite fear. A quirky tidbit circulates quietly here. One historians still debate. Some accounts claim a mysterious light appeared within the cathedral that night, interpreted by many as a divine sign, either of protection or of imminent loss. Whether it truly happened or emerged later as symbolic storytelling remains uncertain, but belief itself shapes reality in moments like this. Historians still argue whether the religious unity achieved that night, Orthodox and Catholic worshiping together despite decades of schism, was sincere reconciliation or simply desperation overwhelming doctrine. Standing among them, it feels like neither explanation fully fits. It feels more like fatigue overriding pride. Outside, the Ottomans are not silent. They chant. Drums pulse rhythmically. Torches move in organized patterns. You can see formations shifting, equipment carried forward, ladders assembled. This is not concealment. This is theater. A demonstration meant to erode sleep itself. Mehmed II wants the city awake. Inside, sleep becomes optional, almost inappropriate. Those who lie down do so in armor. Those who close their eyes do so briefly, jerking awake at every unfamiliar sound. You find yourself sitting against a wall near the gate of St. Romanus, where repairs have been layered so thickly they resemble a geological formation more than architecture. Stone, timber, earth, hope, all compressed together. Someone nearby mutters a joke about the wall being held together by prayer and bad carpentry. It earns a few weak smiles. That counts as comedy now. Constantine returns to the walls just before midnight. This time, he is fully armored. There is no mistaking the symbolism. He is no longer inspecting. He is standing watch. He removes his helmet briefly, wipes his brow, and looks out over the Ottoman camp. Fires stretch endlessly, like a city mirroring the one behind you. Larger, louder, more confident. For a moment, you imagine what he must see. Not an enemy army, but a future already arriving. A detail often overlooked surfaces here. Constantine formally asks forgiveness from those around him for any wrongs committed during his reign. It is an ancient Christian act, deeply personal and deeply political. An emperor acknowledging fallibility on the brink of annihilation. Historians still argue whether this act was spontaneous or carefully staged, but the effect is undeniable. Men straighten. Some weep openly. Others nod silently. The night wears on. At intervals, Ottoman cannons fire, not to breach, but to disrupt. Sleep shatters. Repairs halt and resume. Everyone learns the sound of each cannon by now, like recognizing individual voices in a crowd. You notice something subtle shifting inside yourself. Fear, which once flared sharply, now dulls into something flatter, more manageable. Fear requires imagination. Exhaustion does not. Just before dawn, a strange calm spreads. The chanting stops. The drums fall silent. Fires dim. Movement slows. This is worse. Veterans along the wall exchange glances. Silence, you learn quickly, is the loudest signal of all. Word passes quietly. The final assault is imminent. There is no trumpet, no announcement, just readiness. Weapons are gripped tighter. Armor is adjusted one last time. Someone kisses a ring. Someone else stares east, where the sky begins to pale. You realize the city has not slept. Not really. It has only waited. As first light creeps upward, the walls of Constantinople glow faintly, scarred, cracked, defiant. For a heartbeat, they almost look whole again. Then the horns sound. Long, low, relentless, and the world tilts toward its ending. The horns do not fade, they multiply. What begins as a single, low call fractures into layers, bronze, bone, breath, rolling across the land like an incoming tide. You feel it vibrate through stone, through armor, through your ribs. This is not a signal meant to instruct, it is meant to overwhelm. The final assault has begun. At first light, the Ottomans surge forward in carefully timed waves. You see it clearly now, the structure behind the chaos. Irregular troops go first, shouting, charging, filling the air with noise and movement. They are meant to be seen, meant to be spent. A mainstream historical fact anchors the moment with grim clarity. Mehmed II orders successive assault waves, beginning with less experienced fighters, followed by Anatolian troops, and finally reserving the elite janissaries for the decisive push. This is not anger or haste, it is design. The walls absorb the first impact like a body absorbing blows it has trained for. Arrows fly, stones drop. Oil, heated but precious, pours sparingly. Men shout warnings that barely carry over the din. You move where you are needed, then where you are told, then where there is simply space to stand and push. Time stops behaving normally. Minutes stretch. Hours compress. You lose track of sequence and measure everything instead by effort and breath. Ladders slam against stone. Hands appear over the edge. Fingers, then arms, then faces strained with effort and fear. You strike downward, again and again, not thinking of targets so much as motions. Somewhere nearby, a section of wall gives way. Not fully, not dramatically, but enough. Rubble collapses inward, opening a jagged wound. Defenders rush to fill it with bodies, shields, broken beams, anything that occupies space. This is how walls die, not in one moment, but in increments. A quirky tidbit surfaces amid the frenzy. Some defenders are said to have smeared their hands with vinegar or rough sand to keep their grip steady on weapons slick with sweat and dust. Practical, unromantic, desperately human. Ottoman artillery resumes with renewed fury. The cannons now fire at close range, their thunder concussive, physical. Each shot sends shards of stone whistling through the air like knives. Historians still argue whether the cannons alone doomed Constantinople, or whether exhaustion and manpower shortages mattered more. From where you stand, it feels less like a single cause and more like accumulation. Pressure applied from every angle, without pause. The first assault wave is repelled. Bodies litter the ground outside the walls, motionless or writhing. The sight is sobering, but there is no time to absorb it. The second wave follows almost immediately. These attackers are better equipped. More coordinated, they advance with shields raised, covering one another, learning from the failures of those before them. The defenders, responses grow slower now. Arms ache, throats burn. Focus narrows, someone near you goes down. Not dead, but unable to stand. Two others drag him back without discussion. No heroics, just efficiency. The sun climbs higher. Light sharpens everything. Blood darkens stone, torn banners, smoke drifting low and acrid. The city behind you feels strangely distant, as if separated by more than walls. Constantine XI appears again. Not elevated, not framed by banners. Just another armored figure moving where the fighting is thickest. You see him rally a collapsing line with words you cannot hear but understand anyway. He fights on foot, sword in hand. A later chronicler would write that Constantine threw off all imperial insignia before the final moments, so that he might die as a soldier among soldiers. Historians still debate the accuracy of this account, but the idea persists because it feels right. The second wave breaks, but the cost is clear. Defenders slump where they stand. Some sink to their knees briefly, then force themselves upright again. There will be no rest. A lull follows. Short, deliberate. This is when the Janissaries advance. You feel the shift immediately. The noise changes. Less shouting. More cohesion. Drums beat steadily, almost calmly. Their lines move forward, with unsettling discipline, shields locked, steps synchronized. Fear resurfaces, sharp and cold. They target the weakest point near the gate of St. Romanus, where repairs have layered upon repairs, where the wall is more memory than structure. Cannon fire concentrates there. Each impact widens the breach, loosens the mass holding it together. Defenders pour into the gap, forming a living barricade. You are pressed shoulder to shoulder, shield against shield, bodies packed tight. There is no room to retreat, even if retreat were an option. A banner rises again, this time closer, closer than before. The fighting becomes intimate, personal. Faces blur. You smell breath, sweat, iron. Sound narrows to grunts and clashes. Commands dissolve into instinct. Somewhere in the crush, you hear shouting in Greek, then Turkish, then something wordless altogether. A critical historical moment unfolds amid the chaos. A small gate, the Kirkoporta, is reportedly left open or breached, allowing Ottoman troops to enter the city behind the main defenses. The exact circumstances remain debated, confusion, error, or myth, but its symbolic weight looms large. Historians still argue whether the Kirkoporta incident materially caused the fall or merely coincided with it. What matters is that suddenly, the sense of enclosure fractures. The city is no longer fully sealed. Word spreads unevenly, carried by panic more than accuracy. They're inside. The effect is immediate. Defenders hesitate. Some turn. Others fight harder. Unity strains. You glimpse Constantine one last time near the breach. He is fighting fiercely, surrounded by chaos. Then he disappears. Not dramatically, not ceremonially, but swallowed by movement. The walls finally fail. Not everywhere, but enough. Ottoman troops pour through, spilling like water through a cracked dam. Defenders are pushed back, step by step, then street by street. The fighting does not stop at the walls. It simply changes shape. Behind you, Constantinople begins to fall inward. And as the sun climbs fully into the sky, illuminating the dust and smoke, you realize something profound and terrible. The world you woke up in this morning no longer exists. The city does not collapse all at once, it exhales. As the Ottomans breach the defenses and spill through the openings, Constantinople seems to fold inward rather than explode outward. Streets that once echoed with prayers and arguments now funnel bodies, noise, and fear into tight corridors. The battle loses its grand geometry and becomes fragmented, corner by corner, doorway by doorway. You are pushed back with the others, not retreating so much as being carried by momentum. The walls are behind you now, no longer a line to defend, but a memory already receding. A mainstream historical fact anchors this moment sharply. After the main breach near the gate of St. Romanus, Ottoman forces entered the city in multiple places, overwhelming defenders who were already exhausted and outnumbered. Organized resistance collapses rapidly, replaced by scattered fighting. The soundscape changes. Cannons fade into the background. Drums dissolve. What remains are individual sounds, shouting, running feet, metal striking stone, doors splintering. The scale shrinks from empire to household. You move through streets you walked peacefully only days ago. Familiar corners feel wrong, distorted by urgency. Smoke drifts low, blurring landmarks. Somewhere, a bell rings. Not rhythmically, not ceremonially, but wildly, as if pulled by someone who has forgotten why bells exist. People scatter in every direction. Some flee toward churches, believing sacred spaces might offer protection. Others barricade themselves inside homes, dragging furniture against doors with frantic strength. A few stand frozen, unable to choose. A quirky tidbit surfaces amid the chaos. Chroniclers note that many citizens hid valuables inside walls, wells, or even baked them into loaves of bread in the hope of retrieving them later. Desperation breeds creativity. You pass Hagia Sophia again, but now its doors are open wide, swallowing crowds. The vast interior fills rapidly, voices overlapping, prayers shouted rather than whispered. The great dome looms above, indifferent and eternal in the way only architecture can be. Historians still argue about what people inside the cathedral truly expected: divine intervention, mercy, or simply a place to be together at the end. Standing at the threshold, it feels less like strategy and more like instinct. Ottoman soldiers move through the streets with speed and purpose. Some shout orders, others fan out methodically. Discipline holds, for now, but the sheer scale of the city makes total control impossible in these first hours. You hear cries of triumph mixed with fear, commands mixed with pleas. It is not a single sound, but layers colliding. Some defenders continue to fight in pockets, refusing to surrender ground they no longer have reason to hold. You see one man guarding an alley that leads nowhere, striking until he is pulled back by friends who understand survival has replaced victory. A modern aside slips through your mind, uninvited. This is what it looks like when a system fails completely. Not one dramatic crash, but countless small breakdowns happening at once. The fate of Constantine XI hangs heavily over everything. No one sees him fall. No one witnesses a clear end. He simply vanishes into the fighting. Later stories will claim his body was identified by imperial boots or an eagle emblem, but certainty never truly arrives. Historians still argue whether Constantine died early in the street fighting or later near the walls, but his disappearance itself becomes symbolic. The emperor absorbed into the city he refused to abandon. As the morning advances, Ottoman banners rise across prominent points, towers, intersections, gates. Each banner redraws the mental map of the city, section by section. You retreat deeper, toward districts once considered safely distant from the walls. Nothing feels safe now. Distance has lost meaning. In some areas, resistance collapses immediately. In others, it flares briefly, fueled by anger more than hope. You step over dropped weapons, broken shields, abandoned armor, objects suddenly divorced from their purpose. The smell of smoke thickens. Fires begin, not citywide, not yet, but enough to blur the air and sting the eyes. It becomes harder to tell where sounds are coming from or how close danger truly is. A whispered rumor spreads quickly. The emperor is dead. Then another contradicts it. Then another claims he lives. Truth fractures under pressure. By midday, it becomes clear that organized defense no longer exists. The city belongs to someone else now, and you feel something unexpected beneath the fear and grief, a strange, hollow quiet, as if a tension held for weeks has finally snapped, leaving only aftermath in its wake. Constantinople is falling, not with a scream, but with 1,000 overlapping voices slowly realizing they are no longer being heard by history in the same way. By the time the sun reaches its highest point, the fighting thins, not because it has ended, but because it no longer needs to be everywhere at once. Control replaces chaos. Ottoman forces fan outward from the breached areas, securing intersections, gates, and major landmarks with methodical efficiency. The city's vastness works against it now. What once felt like protection, layers of streets, districts, hidden courtyards, becomes a maze impossible to defend without coordination. A mainstream historical fact anchors this phase clearly. Mehmed II allows his troops a limited period of plunder, a customary practice of medieval warfare, before order is formally imposed. It is not spontaneous lawlessness, but a grimly regulated reward system meant to maintain long-term discipline. You sense the shift immediately. The shouting becomes more purposeful. Commands replace roars. Groups of soldiers move with intent, not frenzy. The city's fate is no longer undecided. It is being administered. You keep to narrower streets now, avoiding open spaces where banners fly and formations gather. People emerge cautiously from doorways, eyes darting, hands empty and raised in instinctive submission. Some kneel, others freeze. A quirky tidbit surfaces here, noted by later observers. Many inhabitants attempted to disguise themselves by changing clothes. Merchants dressing as laborers, nobles removing jewelry, priests hiding vestments. Identity becomes a liability. Historians still argue how widespread violence truly was during these initial hours, whether later chroniclers exaggerated suffering to emphasize tragedy, or whether restraint came more quickly than feared. From where you stand, it feels uneven. Mercy and brutality exist side by side, separated sometimes by nothing more than a street corner. Hagia Sophia's doors finally close, not to keep people in, but because there is no more room. Inside, thousands wait, in suffocating silence, broken only by prayer and crying children. Outside, Ottoman troops gather, observing the massive structure with awe rather than haste. Mehmed II himself enters the city not as a raging conqueror, but as a measured presence. He rides slowly, surveying streets that have resisted him for weeks. Dust coats his armor. His expression is controlled, almost contemplative. A widely accepted historical detail unfolds here. When Mehmed enters Hagia Sophia, he orders the building preserved and converted into a mosque, marking a deliberate transition rather than destruction. He is not ending the city, he is claiming it. Historians still argue whether this decision was motivated primarily by piety, political symbolism, or admiration for the structure itself. Likely, it is all three. You watch as order tightens, looting slows, commands sharpen, punishments are enforced. The rhythm of conquest shifts from seizure to governance with startling speed. People begin to realize something crucial. Survival now depends not on resistance, but adaptation. New rules spread through word of mouth. Curfews, boundaries, prohibitions, permissions. Life reshapes itself almost immediately around unfamiliar authority. The banners that once signaled terror now signal stability of a sort. Fear changes texture, less immediate, more uncertain. The future becomes opaque rather than imminent. You pass by a group of soldiers, marking buildings, recording claims, assigning spaces. The city is being reorganized in real time. Streets that held memories now hold measurements. Somewhere nearby, someone begins to cry. Not loudly, not dramatically, but steadily, as if the sound has been waiting all morning for permission. The fires are extinguished, smoke thins. Sunlight returns, revealing damage with cruel clarity. Walls are broken, roofs collapsed. But much still stands. Constantinople is wounded, not erased. As evening approaches, you realize the most unsettling truth of all. The city is still alive, changed, occupied, grieving, but breathing. The end, it turns out, is not an instant. It is a transition. The news travels faster than any army ever could. You feel it moving outward from the city like a pressure wave, crossing seas and borders carried by merchants, monks, sailors, and refugees whose voices tremble as they speak the words aloud for the first time. Constantinople has fallen. In the streets around you, that realization is still local, still intimate, but beyond the walls, beyond the Bosporus, beyond the Aegean, it detonates. A mainstream historical fact anchors this widening moment. The fall of Constantinople in 1453 sends shockwaves through Europe, accelerating political realignments, intensifying fears of Ottoman expansion, and reshaping how Christian kingdoms perceive their own vulnerability. You imagine the reactions unfolding almost simultaneously. In Rome, disbelief hardens into grief. In Venice and Genoa, calculations replace mourning. Trade routes, alliances, losses measured carefully. In distant monasteries, bells toll for a city many have never seen but always imagined as eternal. Here, inside the conquered streets, the meaning is quieter, but no less profound. People begin speaking differently, less about what was lost, more about what might still be possible. Survival instincts sharpen. Questions change from "will we endure?" to "how do we live now?" A quirky tidbit emerges from this period of transition. Greek scholars fleeing the city carry manuscripts westward. Texts of Plato, Aristotle, and other classical authors preserved through centuries of Byzantine copying. These journeys will later be credited with helping fuel the European Renaissance, though the process is slower and messier than legend suggests. Historians still argue how decisive this intellectual migration truly was. Did Constantinople's fall ignite a renaissance, or merely accelerate currents already in motion? The debate remains open, but the symbolism is powerful, a city's end becoming another world's beginning. Within Constantinople, Mehmed II moves quickly to stabilize. He confirms protections for certain communities, invites displaced residents to return, and begins repopulating neighborhoods that emptied during the siege. Governance replaces conquest with remarkable speed. You watch as markets cautiously reopen. Not fully, not confidently, but enough. Bread appears. Water flows more regularly. Familiar routines attempt to reassemble themselves from fragments. The soundscape shifts again. Where once there were prayers and screams, there are now negotiations. Where bells rang wildly, voices haggle softly. Life inches forward, tentative but stubborn. You pass former defenders now walking unarmed, faces stripped of rank and urgency. Some avoid eye contact, others stare openly, as if daring the world to challenge their continued existence. Outside the city, Christian rulers scramble. Some fortify borders, others send envoys. A few quietly reassess their priorities, realizing that the eastern bulwark they relied upon is gone. Europe feels smaller suddenly, closer to danger. Historians still argue whether the fall of Constantinople truly marked the end of the Middle Ages, or whether that label is a convenient simplification applied later. But labels matter less than feelings, and the feeling across the continent is unmistakable. An age has slipped out of reach. Inside the city, the transformation becomes visible. Minarets rise beside ancient domes. New prayers echo where old ones once lingered. Language itself begins to layer Greek, Turkish, Arabic, Latin, stacked like sediment in the streets. You realize something quietly astonishing. Constantinople does not disappear. It absorbs. The city becomes Istanbul, not through erasure, but accumulation. Its identity stretches rather than snaps, holding contradictions in place. As night falls, lamps light unfamiliar paths. You walk streets that feel both known and foreign, haunted and inhabited. The shock of conquest settles into something heavier: permanence. The world has not ended everywhere, but it has ended here, at least in the form you knew. And from that ending, new histories are already beginning to breathe. Time behaves differently once the shouting stops. Days pass, but they do not feel sequential. They stack instead, one atop another. each carrying small adjustments, quiet recalibrations. You wake, you move, you observe, and each morning the city feels fractionally less stunned and fractionally more altered. A mainstream historical fact anchors this phase of reflection. 1453 is widely treated as a symbolic turning point, often cited as the end of the Byzantine Empire and, by extension, the final chapter of the Eastern Roman world that began over 1,000 years earlier. No empire lasts forever, but few last long enough to forget their own beginnings. Walking through the streets now, you sense layers everywhere. Roman stone beneath Byzantine brick. Byzantine churches beside Ottoman foundations. Time compresses into architecture, forcing centuries to coexist uncomfortably in the same square meter. A quirky tidbit surfaces as you wander. Some early Ottoman administrators reportedly used existing Byzantine bureaucratic records rather than discarding them, simply translating and adapting what already worked. Conquest, it turns out, can be surprisingly pragmatic. Historians still argue whether the fall of Constantinople represents a sharp rupture or a gradual transformation masked by dramatic imagery. Was this truly an ending, or simply the most visible seam in a much longer process of change? Standing here, it feels like both answers are true depending on where you stand. You pass former imperial buildings now serving new purposes. Palaces become offices. Monasteries become warehouses. The sacred and the administrative trade places with little ceremony. The absence of the emperor becomes more noticeable than his death ever could. No portrait replaces him. No successor claims his mantle. Power no longer flows through a single symbolic body. It disperses into laws, officials, patrols, schedules. Authority grows quieter, less theatrical. You overhear conversations shifting tone. People speak less about grief and more about logistics. Taxes, property, permissions. Grief does not vanish. It simply learns to wait its turn. Beyond the city, the mythologizing accelerates. Stories about the fall begin circulating almost immediately, growing sharper and more moralized with distance. In some versions, Constantinople is betrayed from within. In others, it is punished for spiritual failures. In others still, it becomes a martyr city, sacrificed so others might awaken. Historians still argue how much these narratives shaped later European identity, particularly the idea of a threatened Christendom unified by loss. Memory, like empire, is something people build deliberately. Inside the city, memory is quieter. You see it in small gestures. Someone tracing a cross discreetly before entering a building now marked with unfamiliar symbols. Someone preserving a fragment of mosaic hidden behind cloth. Someone teaching a child a story that begins with before. The city begins to develop a double consciousness, public adaptation and private remembrance. You notice something else, subtler. The city's strategic importance has not diminished. If anything, it has sharpened. Trade routes reroute through its harbors. Envoys arrive. Merchants negotiate. Constantinople, now Istanbul, remains a hinge between worlds. A modern aside drifts through your mind. Some places are too useful to be allowed to die. The Bosporus still glitters at sunset. Ships still pass. The wind still carries salt and history in equal measure. Geography remains stubbornly indifferent to ideology. As weeks turn into months, the shock softens. Trauma fades into routine. People learn which streets to avoid, which officials to respect, which customs to follow. Life narrows and then slowly expands again. You realize something that feels almost disloyal to the grief you carried earlier. The city is not haunted in the way ruins are haunted. It is busy. Children play. Dogs roam. Vendors shout. The noise of continuity fills spaces once reserved for empire. And perhaps that is the most unsettling lesson of all. Worlds end. But mornings still arrive. Months turn into years. But the city moves differently now. Time inside Istanbul seems stretched and compressed all at once, history pressing forward while memory clings stubbornly to what came before. You walk streets still scarred by cannon fire, walls patched awkwardly, mosaics hidden beneath plaster. Each surface tells a story, and every story is tangled with survival. A mainstream historical fact asserts itself gently. After the conquest, Mehmed II initiates a deliberate program to repopulate the city, bringing Muslims, Christians, and Jews from across his territories. The aim is practical as much as symbolic. Trade, labor, and tax revenue cannot thrive in a ghost town. Civilization cannot wait. You notice that the mixture of people creates subtle tension but also curiosity. Markets hum with multiple languages. The smell of cooking shifts from Byzantine stews to Ottoman spices. Architecture absorbs new influences while old stones persist beneath. The city lives in layers, each culture sedimented above and alongside the other. A quirky tidbit reveals itself in quiet corners. Some Greeks, fearing complete erasure, convert their family crests into modest floor tiles or engravings, hiding identity in plain sight. A shop sign might read innocuously, "Bakery," but underfoot lies centuries of private memory. Adaptation becomes artistry. Historians still argue whether the city's multicultural balance was intentional or emergent. Some suggest Mehmed aimed for pragmatic coexistence. Others claim it arose organically, as displaced populations found niches. Either way, coexistence now defines daily life more than conquest. You move along the Golden Horn, watching ships dock where fleets once clashed. Cargo is unloaded slowly, methodically. Merchants greet each other cautiously, eyes flicking toward patrols and guards. The harbor's rhythm replaces cannon echoes with commerce. Survival has reshaped priorities. Inside mosques built atop churches, minarets rise like new thoughts in an old mind. Faith no longer divides neatly. Some locals convert, others observe quietly. Prayer continues, but the form changes, and the city listens in a polyphonic hum of devotion and uncertainty. You notice children learning different alphabets, their voices echoing across courtyards, mixing familiar syllables with new ones. This linguistic layering becomes a living testament to both loss and endurance. Stories of the fall circulate still. Some dramatize Mehmed's decisiveness. Others romanticize the last emperor's valor. All are stitched into collective memory, shaping identity for generations. You overhear a street storyteller narrate Constantine XI, not as a man, but as a symbol. A sentinel whose absence defines a new reality. Historians still debate the psychological impact of the conquest on Europe. Did it inspire fear and unity? Did it spur trade and exploration? Evidence suggests all, some, and neither depending on region and observer. Meanwhile, life in Istanbul carries forward, largely oblivious to distant speculation. You pass familiar buildings, once imperial, now adapted. Palaces house administration. Churches are transformed. Roads align with new traffic patterns. Time itself has become flexible. Old rituals persist in private while new ones govern public life. A quiet, almost imperceptible tension persists. People remember the city they lost, but they also participate in the city they inhabit. Nostalgia coexists with necessity. This dual consciousness defines every step you take through its streets. At dusk, the Bosporus reflects both sunrise and sunset at once, a literal and metaphorical mirror. You sense the river carries echoes of empire, war, and survival, layering them in its waters alongside the present day. Each wave, each ripple, is a history moving both forward and backward. Walking home along uneven streets, you realize the ultimate lesson of this transformation. Civilizations end, but life, messy, adaptive, stubbornly persistent, continues. Istanbul's heartbeat is proof. And through it all, you carry fragments of Constantinople inside you. Memories of stone, courage, fear, and determination that refuse to be forgotten. Years stretch and condense simultaneously. The siege, the fall, the initial chaos, they are now memories etched into both stone and psyche, yet somehow still vivid enough to smell the smoke, hear the horns, and feel the pounding of countless feet across battered streets. You walk through Istanbul and realize that endings are not punctuations. They are layers, sedimented atop one another, shaping everything that comes after. A mainstream historical fact reminds you of the scale of transformation. Mehmed II not only claims the city, but consolidates it into the capital of the Ottoman Empire, shifting power from Bursa to Istanbul. Constantinople has become Istanbul, a pivot between Europe and Asia, between past and future, between memory and reality. You wander the streets that once echoed with Byzantine prayers. Now the soundscape has changed. Muezzins call to prayer from minarets, merchants shout their wares in Turkish, Greek, and Italian, and children laugh over games that have been passed down, even as rulers and religions change. The rhythm of life itself asserts persistence. Quirky details persist in the midst of continuity. In certain alleys, mosaics of saints peek through plaster. A street musician plays a Byzantine lyre alongside a Turkish oud. These echoes of the past are subtle but deliberate. Resistance through memory, artful concealment, survival expressed quietly. Historians still argue about the cultural synthesis that emerges in post-conquest Istanbul. Was it accidental, a pragmatic blending of populations, or intentional, a statement of imperial philosophy? You can feel both answers as you pass neighborhoods where Ottoman baths sit above Byzantine cisterns, mosques reuse Roman columns, and families trace their ancestry through multiple traditions. The city has learned to breathe in layers. Life adapts, persisting through trauma and transformation. Markets hum, food smells change, and languages mingle without ceremony. Continuity has a new rhythm. One of coexistence, of cautious pragmatism, and of memory layered into everyday experience. You notice small rituals of remembrance persist. A baker quietly sets aside loaves and shapes, recalling lost mosaics. Children are taught legends of empires fallen and heroes who refuse to abandon their cities. Stories travel orally, merging fact, legend, and moral, in ways historians still debate but everyone feels. From the vantage of the Bosporus, you watch ships pass, carrying goods, people, and ideas between continents. Trade, always pragmatic, becomes a form of resilience. Geography remains indifferent, yet it dictates the rhythms of survival and prosperity. The city's utility has ensured its survival, its endurance, and its reinvention. Night descends differently here than it once did. It is quieter now, not the silence of siege, not the cacophony of battle, but the soft hum of ongoing life, punctuated by lamps, murmurs, and prayers. Shadows reveal both past and present. Domes, minarets, and remnants of walls coexist in a surreal collage. You understand that the fall of Constantinople was more than a military event. It was a pivot, a hinge, a transformation so profound that it echoes through centuries. The city embodies the tension between endings and beginnings, between destruction and adaptation. Standing there, you realize that survival is not heroic in spectacle. It is patient, persistent, and layered. Looking across the water, you feel the weight of continuity. The city has changed rulers, religions, languages, and identities. Yet it is still a city, a center of power, commerce, culture, and human experience. The ghosts of the old empire mingle with the energy of the new, neither fully dominant, both persistent. And you, walking these streets now, sense that history is not a line, but a palimpsest. Each footstep presses down into layers of memory, conquest, adaptation, and resilience. You are part of that chain, one observer in a story that refuses to end neatly. Constantinople may have fallen, Istanbul has risen. And in that continuity lies the quiet, unrelenting truth. Worlds change, empires crumble, but life, persistent, messy, human, continues, shaping the future even as it carries the past. Now that the dust has settled, figuratively and literally, you can let yourself pause. The city you've walked through, from walls pounded by cannons to streets alive with new voices, is both lost and enduring. Constantinople no longer exists in the form it once did, yet its essence survives in every stone repurposed, every minaret raised, every story whispered from parent to child. History, you realize, is less a series of endings than a layered, persistent echo that carries forward in unexpected ways. As you imagine the city at dusk, the Bosporus glimmering under fading light, you notice the contradictions that make it alive. Past and present, grief and adaptation, destruction and creativity, all coexisting in the same space. You've witnessed both collapse and renewal, the intimate chaos of siege, alongside the slow rhythm of life reclaiming itself. And somewhere in that tension lies the truth about civilizations. They are fragile, yet stubbornly resilient. They die spectacularly, yet their remnants seed the future. The fall of Constantinople is a reminder that history is never neat. Events we label as the end often coexist with beginnings we only notice later. The same walls that once repelled attackers now shelter new communities. The same streets that echoed with panic now vibrate with commerce, laughter, and ritual. Memory, architecture, and human perseverance intertwine to create a city that is simultaneously haunted and alive. As you close your eyes and settle deeper into the comfort of your bed, you feel the subtle lessons drift in alongside your sleep. Endings are not annihilation. Survival is layered and quiet, and life continues in forms both familiar and foreign. The world changes around you, empires crumble, and yet, as long as people continue to walk, trade, pray, and tell stories, history lives on, not just in books, but in the rhythms of daily life. So breathe slowly, let the tension of collapse soften, and imagine the city stretching across centuries, alive in every shadow, every stone, every whisper. You've traveled through one of history's pivotal moments. Now, let the calm of continuity carry you gently into sleep. Sweet dreams.